Joining me right now is my Goomba, my good friend. You might know him from KPFK. You might know him from just his website, Don Debar. Well, his YouTube, his Facebook. A lot of great information out there. I found him years ago on Crosstalk, and he's been a friend ever since. Here to talk about geopolitics, elections, debates, the whole 9 yards. My partner in crime and Goomba, Don Debar, is here. How you doing, Don?
Hey, Pasta, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, except the fact I'm getting really scared over here. We're talking about World War III that might be already have started. I don't think people are taking it that serious, especially in the United States. When we had the Moscow massacre months ago, excuse me, when there was a terrorist that I'm using the air quotes now because they're misusing the term terrorist. Who's the real terrorist? Who's spreading the real terror? Well, there was a terrorist attack in Moscow, and it was attached to Ukraine. And I would think at this point in time, most people should understand that anything that happens via Ukraine is happening from the United States, just like the bombing of the beach in Crimea the other day, where several people were injured, many people were injured, several people killed. And the Russians immediately came out and said, hey, those were American weapons, so you're really up in the game over here. What I'm trying to say is that they're putting us really in a position. The United States is actually playing real Russian roulette over here, time and time, proxy after proxy. And then we see aircraft carriers of sorts. I don't want to say a battleship of sorts and a submarine of Russia going into Cuba. We hadn't seen that in years. I mean, that kind of makes me think of the Cuban Missile Crisis, that close. We now see also, too, as well, and I want to kind of talk about this with you because you did an excellent show with Mark Sloboda on it. You see Vladimir Putin driving around in a car in North Korea with Kim Jong-un. Give us a little insight to what that actually means, because I think people aren't seeing the significance of Putin going over there. And he went over there with his whole cabinet, right? His defense minister, his foreign minister, the minister of sewing, the minister of baking bread. What I'm trying to say is that he went over with a lot of people, and there seems to be a new tie of sorts. And it seems to be this attitude like, okay, you want to continue to mess around in Ukraine, Russia, United States with Russia. We're going to go and we're going to start funding your proxies, your enemies, and we're going to start helping them out. Give us a little insights and thoughts to this whole trip to Pyongyang by Vladimir Putin and such.
When I saw that Russia had announced that the president and other government officials were going to Pyongyang, the very first thing I thought of was when Donald Trump went to Pyongyang, because that seemed to me to be a major geopolitical reach, an attempt basically to make a shift in the geopolitical situation on the Korean Peninsula and around it. Around it means adjacent to Korea is China, Russia, and Japan. Korea has been divided since the 1920s, when Japan conquered it, or as much of it as it could conquer. For a while between there and 1945, they were able to go all the way to the top of the peninsula, with the exception of a few small patches, and had large chunks of adjacent China, Manchuria, etc. as well. In the surrender terms to the United States, in 1945, the so-called unconditional surrender included a provision for the United States to succeed in title jurisdiction, however you want to put it, to take over those holdings that the Japanese Empire, which was what they called itself, had taken over. That included its holdings in Korea. The period from 1945 to 1952 was a period of instability. It began with the Japanese occupation troops remaining in place in their bases, and the U.S. military command essentially becoming the officer corps for the Japanese occupation army. And then over a period of time, a few months, maybe a year and a half, I think it ended up taking, swapping out the Japanese soldiers for American ones who have occupied Korea from the 38th parallel south since the shifting line was finally settled in 1953. Korea, North Korea, as it's called, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, people refer to it as, has it's the part of Korea that is not a colony. It's the part that's not occupied by a foreign army. The U.S. occupies South Korea. U.S. corporations and financial institutions have major stakes in the Korean economy. Korea, if you walk around town, produces a hell of a lot of stuff: automobiles, Samsung telephones and computers. Things all around you come from South Korea, known as the Republic of Korea, which is based in Seoul. That's the part that is occupied by the U.S. military. The tensions between the two camps, the geopolitical camps, and then ultimately three camps from the Chinese Revolution forward up until the last 10 years or so, found a focal point at Korea. The two Koreas were proxies for the socialist bloc and the West in a number of incidents. There were military exercises taking place constantly between the two. Again, if you look at a map, the proximity of the Korean Peninsula to China and Russia and Japan, and with that, U.S. forces, for example, in Okinawa, Japan, you can see that this is an area of high strategic value, not just strategic value. And if you look at the rise of Asia as the future of humanity for the next 100 or 1,000 or however long years it's going to take, you have not just historically Japan and China as powers there, but Korea also, in and of itself, is a major Asian power over the course of history. And the southern part has been industrialized to the point that it's a 21st century economy in a lot of ways, the technological aspect especially, as is Japan and as is China. So Korea divided, put half of Korea in the socialist camp and now in the BRICS camp, I guess, and the other half in the West's camp with Japan maybe as a leading partner and interlocutor. Instead, Trump reached out to try to swing that. So suddenly the whole Korean Peninsula would have been an ally of the West ultimately. I mean, I assume that's the geopolitical goal. And instead, when the U.S. government, basically the deep state, whatever you want to talk about, certainly Congress, clipped his wings and drove that deal away, that left North Korea basically in a position of looking for another partner, and there ain't only one other partner. And Russia and China have been watching, and they've been quietly supporting DPRK over the years. But here was the moment. We're building, a Eurasian future for the world. And you obviously have great potential as an industrial power. And you also have some infrastructure already that's very advanced for that. Reunified Korea as an industrial power would change the balance of power in Asia that currently sits between two poles of occupied Japan, basically by the United States and China. Now you have India as sort of a peripheral player, not to that project, but to East Asian politics. So this is a really key piece on the chessboard. And President Putin went there with a full, he had a full platoon of players with him across the government and the economy. And they went in with proposals that had already been advanced, I guess, and negotiated, and sat down and cut a bunch of deals. And that includes, I mean, if you look at the war in Ukraine alone, outside of everything else I just described, the U.S. stabilize Russia and tie it down in a war of attrition that would further cause further destabilization in the country and also erode its industrial base and its economy. That was kind of the strategy that they employed in Afghanistan and East Europe in the 1980s, and they credit that with what happened after that. I think that there's a little more boast and less, fact in that argument. But nevertheless, there were people here who thought that this is the formula. Let's use it again. And so they tried. The economy didn't falter in Russia. In fact, it's thriving. And in terms of geopolitics and in terms of the war of attrition going on in Ukraine, it seems that it is a war of attrition, but it's the West that can't manufacture sufficiently the actual armaments that are being used in actual battle there. Like, all of the mortars and the other stuff that you use for a ground battle, ground battle. And so now suddenly, aside from Russia beefing itself up, and aside from the other geopolitical allies of necessity that the U.S. has created for Russia, such as Iran, and now we see also DPRK and some others, the industrial capacity of China, just to produce, for example, if you're going to produce tanks, China outproduced the U.S. in terms of automobiles and truck production and all of that stuff by 2 or 3 to 1 last year, I think. So if you're going to be making Jeeps and tanks and stuff, just China alone will outproduce the U.S. And Russia, Korea, and some others would be dealing with Europe, which, by the way, has had, been basically, I won't say largely, but substantially deindustrialized over the last 2 years by the shenanigans with the pipeline and other geopolitical moves by the U.S. So, this is one piece of a whole. Adding Korea and having, say, China or Russia or someone else, finance the construction of factories and other things to build armaments in Korea, it is going to make it almost impossible to outproduce that bloc on the battlefield in Ukraine. Certainly, they'll run out of Ukraine before they run out of ammunition at that point.
Okay, let's talk about some things over here. Let's diagnose some of the pieces moved on the chessboard, because you laid out a lot of things, and I think people don't know. And one of the things I'm going to put on the little ticker down below is, did you know that South Korea provides more ammunition to Ukraine than most European countries, especially in the forms of mortars? A lot of people don't understand that. And when you talk about Donald Trump going over there and maybe flipping the script and saying, okay, let's get the whole Korean peninsula on our side, I think a lot of people don't realize that there were people, businessmen within the Trump team or campaign or supporters, whatever you want to call them, that were excited to get a hold of North Korea because they said they can produce so much stuff over there. They're actually a workers' party, a labor party over there. They're already set up that we could plug and play them into our economy. Hey, they can make more than some of those TVs that they're doing in South Korea and stuff like that. Yeah, they won't let us control them as much, but we can use them. We can really profit off of North Korea becoming an ally of ours. He was shot down. He was shot down with the rhetoric in Congress. This is Donald Trump. He was shot down by the military-industrial complex because they almost immediately practiced those war games, when that's the number one thing that Kim Jong-un and the North Korean government wanted was stop these games, because these games are mimicking an invasion attack. They're creeping up to the fence every time. At what point are they not going to, they're going to stop and say, this is a drill. You need to stop that. They couldn't do that. They couldn't push it back. So my question is, when we talk about all the situation, and now we talk about the fact that, Putin has showed up, he brought everybody with him, tourism, right, military, everybody. We're gonna plug you right into our system. We don't give a damn what the Americans say anymore. And that's that there. One of the biggest factors that people don't know, that South Korea is providing ammunition to Ukraine at a high level. Does the ruling class then want World War III? Because, I would think like the military-industrial complex, the big pharma, whatever, big tech, they'd say, all right, Donald Trump, if he's a rogue guy, we can't let him go crazy, but we can give him some spots here and there. I would think militarily-wise, and this is what Donald Trump thought, he picked North Korea and said, I can do this right here, right? You know what I'm saying? Like he said, I'll free Ross Ulbricht. He said he'll free Ross Ulbricht because he couldn't free Julian Assange. He wasn't allowed to. But North Korea was one of those areas where maybe I can flip this here. And if I take their economy with them, we get cheap labor, cheap stuff, then the ruling class will let us do it. They didn't let them do it. Does the ruling class want World War III from what we're seeing, Don?
No sane being wants World War III. That doesn't necessarily mean that this ruling class doesn't want it. I can't really characterize them as to whether or not they're sane, insane, or something else. The fact is that we are very close to having a global war. The recent stuff in Ukraine alone, you mentioned the terrorist attacks in Dagestan. You also had the bombings, in essence, the shelling of a beach in Sevastopol in Crimea, civilians killed there. That being, within 2 or 3 days of statements out of Washington that attackums like that, they're called the attack MS, right? Attackums, that particular missile weapon, which has a range that can go into Russia, pretty substantially, actually, would be allowed to be used for that. Those also require affirmative targeting and guidance work from the U.S. military, which was obviously, by deduction, provided. And so what we've seen is an escalation again, where U.S. missiles that are clearly U.S. missiles. Russia says these are U.S. missiles. The U.S. says, we heard what they say, we have no comment. And they have already said in public statements that Ukraine can use them for whatever they want. Ukraine has made public the fact that they want to make war upon the Russian Federation. And so in that context, you had a bombing of civilian area beach, basically, in Russia, killing Russian citizens by the Ukrainians as the first move. So in response, I assume that's what it was done. 2 days later, because this is also in the context of they're going to send fighter jets now and other aerial, attack material, basically, to Ukraine. And they've been building the infrastructure for that, including a couple of airstrips inside of Ukraine that were intended to be the source, the origin points for these sorties that would be flown with these new planes. Russia decided enough, and they blew that up. They blew it to 1 million pieces yesterday or today. So either the U.S. effort and whoever else, but really the U.S. effort to put these planes into battle on behalf of Ukraine, whether with American, dummy pilots or trained Ukrainians or chimpanzees or whoever flies them. Russia has said that not only that this is a red line, but they blew up the wherewithal that had been delivered to Ukraine to do it. So then the next decision for the U.S. is, are we going to start flying these then from Poland or Romania or Bulgaria or somewhere else outside of Ukraine? In which case, then Russia's move is, well, we're going to take the damage from this, where we're now going to be in an aerial battle, almost in our own airspace with NATO, or do we reach wherever they set the infrastructure up for this and blow that up? And so that's going to be a very limited number of possible target locations. Again, Poland, Bulgaria, and Romania are along that side, or you've got Finland, I assume that would be one also, or the Baltics, or Georgia, which is sort of hot and cold right now, or Armenia, which is sort of hot and cold right now. Someone who is either in NATO or working with NATO is going to be chosen to host the infrastructure, for, the base from which these attacks by the Ukrainians in the U.S. Air Force equipment will be launched. And Russia has demonstrated with this first strike that you guys set that show up someplace, we're blowing it up. And they've already said, if you're going to start blowing up stuff in Russia, we're going to take that stuff out no matter where it is. That's pretty damn close to World War III, since the shooting started a long time ago already.
I don't think people understand what's going on in the Korean Peninsula. They don't understand that they're not tying it together because, a lot of the people just grew up. I mean, the Korean War was what, in the 50s?
Yeah.
So it's like right? It's a long time ago. So they just kind of grow up thinking that there's a dictator in Kim Jong-un over there. And, we're actually helping out South Korea and fighting for their freedom and yada, 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 yada. There's so much to go into. Let's pivot right into our next section, though, because I think that you've answered, unless you want to tie anything up. I mean, the answer to my question, does the ruling class want World War III? Your answer was, I don't know if they want it, but we're damn close to it, no matter any way you look at it. So, I mean, I think that's clear enough. And now we've connected the dots where we're showing what South Korea has been doing. It's a vessel. It's different leadership that was in there when Trump went over there and walked across the parallel and met Kim Jong-un. Moon Jae-in was the president there. His party is not in charge now in South Korea. South Korea's got a complete puppet dictator, do whatever the United States wants them to do. I think there's a karaoke video of him singing to Biden, the president now in South Korea, something stupid. So we understand now. We're connecting the dots. Guys, please go to Don Debar's YouTube. He's got a couple videos up there with Mark Sloboda and other people talking about what's going on.